Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me make sure that we are live everywhere. It's kind of hard to do this multitasking, talking, and doing this at the same time. Uh, Um, Instagram. All right. So my name is Gaetan, and I'm with Friends of the Congo. It's my pleasure for another week, another live every Friday. During which we discuss a lot of things happening in the Congo, kind of like go over the news, what's happening in the Congo. If there's any news, just trying to break down the humanitarian crisis, the Rwandan invasion, and the 30 war of aggression and plunder that is still ongoing in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Um, so a lot of things happen or has happened, and so we just want to be able to discuss these things. One of the things I wanted to talk about today is the title, the concept of justice. So justice for the Congo. Can Rwanda or the government of Rwanda or Paul Kagame be taken to court? That's essentially the title today. I will not be joined by my dear co-host Sylvia. She's celebrating sister's wedding, so I'm glad that she's being able to spend time with her family because one of the things that we also advise and we push it's this balance, right? Like doing activism and also being able to dedicate time for ourselves and for family. And yeah, my dear co-host is not going to be with us today, so please bear with me. It's just going to be me, and I might be joined by Morris Corny later, but if not, it's okay. We'll have plenty, or I have plenty to share with you guys and to discuss. I'm not sure why, but I'm not live on Friends of the Congo Instagram account. Let's do this. All right. Technical difficulties. But yeah, that's the balance, right? It's so the work that we do, um, volunteering and stuff, advocating for the Congo, doing lives and produce content. It's a lot of work, intellectual work, and it's also draining. And it's very very important for folks, for us to uh, take the time um, to do self care, right, and to spend time with families and stuff. So um, we do our best to do that while trying to advocate for the Congo. We're trying to like raise awareness. So that's a perfect example. I always tell, well, people always tell me, how do you find time to do all of this and talk about the Congo? Well, I take the time to rest, and then also disconnect whenever possible, whenever given the opportunity. So and we are live on Friends of the Congo account. So yes, so today it's April 4th, 2025. It's our weekly, I would say, meet up with me and you to discuss about Congo. So again, my name is Gaetan, Gaetan Zo, and thanks everyone on X, on YouTube, on Instagram, and on Facebook. There are still people using Facebook, believe it or not, to discuss this topic. And today I'm gonna bring um, the conversation today with by addressing a burning question. And when talking about the Congo, there is always one word coming to mind is justice. So the tonight question will be: is international justice possible uh, for the atrocities committed in the Congo? That's the question for tonight. And more specifically, the question that I have for y'all, or that we are going to unpack, will be: can Rwanda, and I'm really want to be specific, the Rwanda regime, can he be taken to an international court? Can Paul Kagame, as the head of state, as the president of Rwanda, be held personally accountable? What mechanism exists today, and what are the obstacles? Obviously, I'm no lawyer, and but hopefully we'll be able to address that. And Morris just joined us. Hey, Morris, how you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, yourself? Can you hear me okay?
Yes. I had a little bit of technical difficulty earlier, but everything is fine since everything is running on all our platforms. So yeah, I'm not
Hmm.
sure if you thought at the beginning, but today's conversation is very particularly interesting because I really want us to answer some of the questions. The questions for today is: in Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, or Paul Kagame himself, being taken to international court? And more specifically, I really want us to discuss some of the questions that I prepared for today's conversation. Can Rwanda be taken into international court? Can Paul Kagame, as the head of state, be held personally accountable? And something maybe interesting for the sake of the conversation is really discuss the mechanism that exists today, and and what are the obstacles to make sure that there is justice. But before we dive into the subjects, perhaps I want to give you the floor, maybe to kind of give an overview of what has been happening in DC, about Congo, about the kind of like the background conversation. I know that a special envoy or representative of on someone on behalf of Trump, who happens to be his daughter's father-in-law, I believe, was in Congo yesterday to discuss many things, including the mineral deal. So tell us, like, what do you know about what's going on and what has been happening in DC and in Kinshasa?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know if it was you I was speaking with Gaitan. There's so much has been uh, been going on, both in terms of um, Congolese politicians and uh, figures coming to Washington to lobby the U.S. Administration, members of Congress. Uh, we've seen, let's say, a phalanx of Congolese politicians or officials coming through Washington D.C. Both those who are in the majority and the opposition as well. In addition to that, we've seen uh, representatives of both the Catholic and Protestant churches come through Washington as well. I They've been doing tours, different. They started out in the Congo and uh, with President Tshisekedi, and they moved on to Goma with M23, then uh, Kigali and Kampala and the European Union. So these pastors are carrying a message of peace, or what they call a path to peace. So there's just been a lot of diplomatic activity going on, and it's kind of interesting. I was sharing with folks that it's very telling, right? Here it is that you have a crisis in the Congo, but you have Congolese politicians and their lobby firms in Washington on both sides of the equation, meaning the opposition and those in power. You have different ministries like the Ministry of Communications and the state, the parastatal Kagame, all having lobby firms in Washington D.C. So what that says or signals in any case is the neo-colonial structure that's in place that would result in Congolese politicians coming to Washington to resolve a problem, or an issue in the Congo itself. So I think that's worthy of discussion and some reflection in terms of the extent to which, whether real or perceived, right, you have these high-level Congolese officials believing that Washington can make a difference for them in their domestic politics, right? Because they're not necessarily solely coming to, call on Washington to put pressure on Rwanda. It's not that kind of solely that kind of engagement, right? They're talking about Washington being, or the leadership in Washington being involved in a way that's going to make a difference for them, right? On the part of Tshisekedi, Washington weighing in so that he can maintain his presence in office, part of the opposition. They're vying for Washington to get behind, whatever their view is, so that they can access more power, so to speak. So that's something worth pondering. Certainly should be of concern, especially to young Congolese such as yourselves. These leaders, they're not going to, Lubumbashi. They're not going to Mbujimai. They're not going to Kisangani. They're not going to Mbandaka to rally the population around a program, around a proposition, around their ideas, right? That's not where they're going, but they're flying across the Atlantic to Washington D.C. So that's the first thing that I took note of, and it didn't just begin yesterday. It's been ongoing, and I'm understanding Congo's history. You may, give some leeway to these to the political class, in the sense that every single person who has risen to power in the Congo since the United States overthrew Lumumba, the U.S. has had a say, has had influence about whether or not that person would actually assume the ultimate leadership of the country. So maybe with that historic backdrop, these political leaders are engaged in real politics, so to speak. So as a young Congolese, I'd really be interested to get your sense of what that means to you, that have to come to Washington to address, domestic affair in the Congo.
I think we talking about the Catholic Church, and they actually have been putting some work. Trying to see if I can pull this up for the folks to like visually, have an idea of what we're talking about. Yes, they have been going everywhere. They started with by meeting with the President Tshisekedi a few months ago, and then they were able to go to Rwanda and meet Paul Kagame himself, to going to Kenya and meet President Ruto, to Uganda meeting with President Museveni, and even Congo Brazzaville, right? Our neighbors right there across the Congo River, to meet with President Sassou Nguesso, and they've been everywhere. I stopped keeping track. They went to France to meet up with President Macron, and they I don't know if I'm not sure if they're still in the US, but they met with Antonio Guterres of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Not sure if they have met or they are intending to meet with Congress or even Donald Trump himself. I would doubt
they
it.
met with members of Congress.
They did?
Yeah, they met with members of Congress.
Yeah. But I think this speaks about really where the solution to this crisis really lies on, right? Not just because it's not just a Congolese issue. Like many people have been trying to frame these conflicts that the issue of M23 or even the CNDP before that, or the RCD before CNDP, or even the AFDL before RCD. That is about it's a matter of ethnicity, right? So it's an ethnic conflict. It's Congolese and African fighting among Africans. It's not about the minerals. It's about them oppressing one particular group that happen to speak in Rwanda, and I feel like framing the conversation that way is disingenuous, because really, like we've seen with the Catholic Church and Protestant Church, it involves multiple actors, and you yourself have said that even in the movie, in a documentary, "Crisis in the Congo," that I've been showing every night now, while trying to test my internet connections for people to really understand what's going on in the Congo. That it's not just about Congolese, but it's also Rwanda involved. It's also about Uganda involved. It's also about those who fund or who are providing funding to those to these two countries, right? So when we want to talk about, it's also about international community within the United Nations, because they do have the power, and hopefully we will talk about that, the power to enforce or implement some of the laws that Rwanda has been violating the international law, right? Or applying sanctions or arm embargo to nations that are destabilizing the Congo. So I think it's important to have those type of conversation with all these actors. I just don't think that this process of this peace talk is new. And again, I'm only 31, but I know throughout history, in recent history, that had happened, right? With the Sun City Accord in 2002, that involved Congo talking among themselves with all the rebel groups, and that led to the creation to the really unique governments where we had one president, like four vice presidents. Three of them were serving, or they were like in the militia groups, right? Zaidi Ngoma and Jean-Pierre Bemba with the MLC, and then Azayas Ubewa from the RCD, and then Yodia Dombasi, who was representing the AFDL at that time, right? Because Laurent Desire Kabila had just been assassinated, and that was in 2002. And even if you have to go back to just move a little bit forward to 2013, when we had the Accord Cadre Addis Abeba, the Addis Abeba Accord, that saw countries in the region, including Rwanda and the DRC, obviously discussing of what that peace would look like, and how it was very, very important and imperative for nations in the region to respect Congo's integrity. And also a question that now we see keep coming back is that conversation regarding the Congolese minerals and how the Congolese resources had to be shared among nations. That was very like a key component. But to answer to your question, I think it's important to have these conversations and involve other actors. But I don't think that these are new. So the question is, when doing those things, what are we doing? What are we repeating and still expecting the same results? That's the question to ask, or that's the conversation to have, right? What the Catholic Church, how is what the Catholic Church and Protestant Church in the Congo right now doing different from what was done in 2013, from what was done in 2013 with Addis Ababa, with what was done in 2002 in Sun City in South Africa, and what was done in 1999 in Lusaka with the Lusaka Accord. And we can go on and just ask the same questions, and maybe you can educate us on what do you think the approach, how do you think this approach is going, if you think that will be effective, if you really want to talk about peace in the Congo.
Yeah, I would make a distinction between the church leaders and the politicians, in the sense that I believe that the church leaders are genuinely seeking peace, right? And politicians are seeking power, and they believe that the source of their power, or substantial part of the source of their power, is found in Washington, right? I mean, the very deal that Tshisekedi put on the table, minerals for security. You don't enter into a minerals or propose a minerals for security deal if you don't believe that entity, that partner can provide, that you're entering into a deal into, can provide you with security, right? So to some extent, or to a large extent, he sees his salvation in Washington, and believes that if he forks over minerals, that's going to help him. I don't think it's so much help him, in terms of, when you say security, you have to question whether he's talking about security of the Congolese people or security of his position as president, right? Because this is the same administration that jailed Congolese youth who were trying to get the administration's attention to say, hey, Bunagana is occupied. We need to do something, right? And the Congolese government put them in jail, chased them out of the country. And so that says to you, or at least it says to me that, well, the question of security in the East is maybe not that big of an issue, right? Or it hasn't been until now, that maybe it's at a crisis level where they have to, where his presidency is threatened, right? So I'll make that distinction too. Certainly, and part of the reason why I say that is that we were with the pastors last night, and they were speaking to Black church leaders in the United States, right? And they addressed those questions directly in terms of Addis, in terms of Sun City. They listed some. They said there's some 48 or so peace forums, or engagements, dialogues that have gone on, and they haven't produced any peace. They felt that in order to get to the root of the matter, right, you have to address the question holistically. At least this was their response to that specific question that came about. And addressing the matter of peace holistically means that you have to engage with local actors. You have to engage with the M23 and the Congo River Alliance. You have to engage with regional leaders, particularly Kagame, President Kagame of Rwanda, and President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. You have to engage with the international community, the European Union and the United States. And you have to engage with the United Nations. That's why they went to see Antonio Guterres. They said they all have to be a part of the solution. And that's one of the things that they said that really they felt wasn't part of the equation in the past, this holistic approach, right? That's one. What they said, you don't hear from the Congolese politicians, which I found particularly interesting, is that they felt that there was a urgent need or a substantial need for civic education, right, among the population, that the Congolese population writ large needs to be engaged. And they proposed in their peace pact, right, they proposed a path or where the Congolese population can be engaged. We had Mama Justine Masika of Synergie des Femmes here with us for the month of March, International Women's Month. And she was keen to raise the issue of women engagement, women participation in these talks. She felt that women ought to play a significant role in whatever peace talks that are unfolding. And she's advocating for that. The pastors proposed a national first a national conference, right, with all the players that I mentioned: civil society, faith institutions, the belligerents, and then they also proposed an international conference as well that would come up with concrete solutions for enduring peace. And they said something that you may not necessarily agree with or have question about, Gaetan. They talked about the interests of their neighbors, meaning Rwanda and Uganda. And they said, well, admittedly, their security interests, so they didn't question that much. And then they said their economic interests, and that you cannot put that out of the equation, that these neighbors have interest in Congo's minerals. And they're intimating, they didn't necessarily elaborate on it or said it unequivocally, that there should be room for sharing, so to speak, right? And in terms of Congo's resources, that's really similar to what they call the Sarkozy plan, where former French president had put a proposal on the table that was co-signed by Washington lobbyists that called for Congo sharing its resources with its neighbors, right? It's almost like an economic integration, so to speak. So those are some of the elements that they put on the table. But again, I'd make a distinction between them, those pastors who are not only coming to Washington, they're going from the bottom to the top, right? From inside the country, regionally, continentally, and internationally, and genuinely trying to secure peace. Make a distinction between them and the politicians. What I'd shared with folks recently, that in looking at the current crisis, it's important, as a tool of analysis, right? As a tool of analysis, that we understand that, both Kagame, right, and Tshisekedi are neo-colonial leaders, right? They both respond to the logic of the metropole, so to speak, right, of international finance capital, right? They prioritize foreign interests over their own people's interests. That's their relationships. They're tethered to the global elite. They're firmly ensconced in that logic. So, once you understand that and you understand that framing, then you can see why on Tshisekedi's first visit to the United States in 2019, he spoke in front of APAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, right? So he's, I showed folks before October 7, 2023, the Israeli Defense Forces were in the Congo training Congolese soldiers, right? They only left to go back to Israel, to reinforce Israel's onslaught against the Palestinians. So understanding these basic elements, and that you won't be confused to think that because we're trying to put pressure on Kagame, right, as a lackey for the West, that doesn't necessarily mean that the leader of the Congo is also a lackey for the West, right? Probably even more so than Kagame, and more in a more desperate way, even, right? So what that leaves the Congolese people, like, how does all this affect the people? That's why we say when we rally support, around the people, not around a particular leader, right? And you look at the likes of Paul Kagame, the likes of Yoweri Museveni, the likes of Felix Tshisekedi, they represent a particular type of African leadership, right? A neo-colonial leadership. So that is so critical to just in terms of fundamental understanding. So you're not you reduce the amount of confusion that may enter into how you view what's unfolding, right? So I was, as I said, just to go back a bit, the proposals on the part of the pastors that centers civic education, that centers popular education, that centers the people, I think is indispensable, for a lasting peace, because the extent to which the Congolese masses are informed, educated, organized, is the same extent to which we're going to see peace. We have a chance at peace and stability in the country. What does that mean? That means, like, when elections are held, if communities are informed and they're strong and they're organized, then they're going to ensure that their representatives reflect their interests, and they will be organized in a way that if those interests are not reflected, as was the case in 2018, I think it's so important. I don't even think it's been discussed enough, like the extent to which what we're seeing play out today has a lot of roots in 2018, right? Because in 2018, the head of the Congo River Alliance, Corneille Nangaa, was the head of the Electoral Commission, right? And he, along with the former president Joseph Kabila, who was forced to hold elections, right? Remember, his term ended like in 2016, right? There was supposed to be a new election in 2016, and he wanted to stay in power, but because the youth in particular, the intellectuals and activists in the Catholic Church, and the Congolese masses writ large, along with opposition, organized, demonstrated, pressured Kabila to the point where he didn't have a choice but to give up power, right? And in giving up power, he wanted to still try and hold on, right? So the best way he felt that he could do that was to direct the president of the Electoral Commission, right, to invalidate the actual results, right? Where another opposition figure actually garnered more of the votes, that the people wanted another figure other than Felix Tshisekedi. So they orchestrated the invalidation of the results. That, when I say they, meaning in particular Felix Tshisekedi and Joseph Kabila and Corneille Nangaa, the three of them. And today, you have Corneille saying to folks, right? Like, okay, I created a monster because I selected him as using my power as president of the Electoral Commission, and now I'm going to go into the bush and kill people in order to remove him from power. Now, who's going to follow somebody like that? Why would the Congolese people even they're like, you were part of the problem. You're like you started the fire, and now you're saying you're the firefighter, right? So that 2018 deal, because even now Kabila is back on the scene, waxing eloquently in articles and on social media about what the solutions should be, when in fact he was a part of the problem. And on top of that, he was in power for 18 years and didn't really do anything to advance the social, economic conditions of the Congolese people. So I think that part, that element of the crisis that we see today, that is internal, to some extent internal to the Congress. They made a deal, and that deal had to be co-signed by regional leaders like Kagame himself, right? That's why when Kagame talks about Tshisekedi, he hints at, like, you weren't elected in the first place. The folks in the European Union, Foreign Policy ran an article in 2019 that talked about the role of the United Foreign Policy magazine, one of the major magazines here in DC, talked about the role that the United States played in creating what they call an African deal, right? African deal meaning that the Africans got together.
With former mayor of New York, I think he was involved.
I don't know if the former mayor of New York was involved. You're talking about Giuliani?
Giuliani, yeah.
Rudy Giuliani. He may have been. I don't know. He was doing something on behalf of the. He may have been involved. Yeah.
I saw an article about that
in terms
a
of
few
one of
years ago. Yeah.
the lobby firms that he that he worked with. So when we talk about centering the people, it's so critical, because ultimately that's where you're going to find the solutions, and the faith leaders are on that. That's a part of the equation for them. But for those politicians who, the Delhi, who's it? Senga is here, Moise Katumbi, and all the others are here. I don't necessarily see that being a part of the equation for them.
Did you meet up with them? Did you personally meet up with them?
No.
Or even virtually?
No. Oh, you mean the pastors? Personally met with the pastors.
But for those for those listening, and we're talking about like the mineral deals, like essentially what are you saying to Congolese people who claim that deal in exchange of the Congolese security or peaceful would work? I was in a debate, conversation on X this morning about one fellow Congolese was saying that deal will ensure that the international sovereignty of the Congo will be respected, and then Rwanda will no longer be killing Congolese people. What do you think that really this deal that Tshisekedi is trying to push forward will?
Am I lost, or is it you? I can't tell. The connection is not that good. Was that me with a bad connection? I'm hearing you a little bit, but I don't know if I'm the only one on. If we lost Gaetan, and just in case we did, Gaetan, seems like we may have lost you. But I think you were talking about the mineral deal, and that's something that you're bringing up and wanted us to address. And a lot of people have been asking about Tshisekedi's proposal to Donald Trump. That's what you were asking about, right?
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
I was just asking. My apologies. I was asking about the deal, the mineral deals. What do you think? Whether or not that will bring peace and security to the Congolese people, and like a fellow Congolese was saying earlier, that will guarantee that Paul Kagame and the government of Rwanda will no longer be encroaching on Congolese land, guarantee the Congolese sovereignty, and also that the killing of civilians will stop. What do you think about that? These mineral deals with the United States will provide those elements. What do you think?
Oh, that's a really good question. First of all, let me say I've neglected to mention something, a key point that the pastors mentioned. They said a primary concern of theirs was the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Congo. Part of the reason why they're making these tours is to assure that everybody's on the same page, that Congo would not be balkanized. They said when they sat down with Kagame, that was a key point of discussion with him. They don't believe that Kagame's aim is to balkanize the Congo. And part of the reason why they say that is that they see the M23, they're not just capturing Eastern Congo, but they're moving, trying to, go from Walikale to Kisangani. Their aim is to take power, with Congo intact. So I thought it was an important point to mention in terms of the conversations that we had last night. But you have to ask yourself, right? Where on the African continent has the U.S. military brought peace? I'm just saying. I mean, I have to ask myself, just objectively. So where on the African continent has the U.S. military brought
This
peace?
is a great question.
I'm not saying I have the answer. I don't know.
Interesting.
I'm just that's a question when people say, well, minerals for security. Where is on the continent that the U.S. military brought security? In the last half a century. Where? So I would have to ask myself that question, before we even get into the details of whether or not it's even feasible. Like, what's the track record, right? You see this nation as a source for bringing security, but what is the track record, particularly on the African continent? Does this entity, the state, has bringing peace? Now, mind you, this is the same state that overthrew and led to the assassination of your national hero, right? And then you're going back 60 years later to say, come, I know you overthrew our independence leader and our first democratically elected prime minister, right? Led to his assassination. So now we're coming back to you and say, come and bring peace and security to our country. Oh, and by the way, you can have the minerals that our first democratically elected prime minister said that ought to be, under the purview of the Congolese people, right? And they ought to be the primary beneficiary of those minerals.
Yeah.
So if you do a historic analysis, it may reveal some things that make the deal even seem preposterous, right? If you look at it historically and just think about what is being said and what is being offered. So I would answer it initially with a question, but let's be clear. The U.S. Remember when you have the U.S. Africa Summit in 2022, where the United States brought all African leaders to Washington, D.C., right? One of the things that came out of there was a memorandum of understanding between the United States, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo that dealt with minerals deal, right? Now, when that was announced, a lot of our colleagues were up in arms. Congo's selling off its minerals to the U.S., right? Which wasn't true because it was just paper. There wasn't anything behind it. It was just like an announcement, right? Of course, the idea that Zambia and Congo had was that in engaging with the U.S. in the minerals deal, U.S. can bring technology and investment that would add value locally, right, to the basic, in essence, the copper belt, right? But there wasn't really nothing behind the MOU. But since then, under the U.S. and the European Union and the group of 7 nations, you have what they call the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, which is those entities response to China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? Where they say the G7, the European Union, United States, say they're going to build infrastructure locally in the global south, not just in the Congo or Africa, so that value can be added locally, right? Because, one of the major issues in this value chain or the supply chain is that the raw materials are just extracted out of the countries, and there's no value added locally. The value is added near the end of the supply chain. So that partnership for global infrastructure and investment, one of its initial projects was the Lobito Corridor, the rehabilitation of the Lobito Corridor, which is a rail corridor that would build on a colonial rail line that runs from the ports in Angola to the border in the DRC, and then they'll extend it from the border in DRC and Angola through to Kolwezi, the basic the mining center of the Congo, where you get the copper and the cobalt from. So that's in place. Joe Biden went there before he ended his term in December in 2024 to see what was, I guess, unfolding, or to celebrate an accomplishment of his administration in bringing this kind of infrastructure to the copper belt and to the heart of the African continent. So that's already in place, and then you have some structural impediments as well, like up to 80% of the copper and cobalt mines are owned by the Chinese, right? And one of the largest copper mines was given up by the United States, a U.S. company, right? The Tenke-Fungurume mine in the old Katanga province, right? That Freeport-McMoRan of Arizona, they owned it, right? At one point, Gaetani was even in the Financial Times, I don't know if it's true or not, they reported that was one of the top 20 protected terrorist sites by the United States in an article published by the Financial Times back in the day. So Tenke-Fungurume sold the copper mine. Freeport-McMoRan sold the Tenke-Fungurume copper mine to China Molybdenum for $2.5 billion or so. Even the New York Times reported that company that Hunter Biden is a part of helped to negotiate the deal, right? So the U.S., gave up, that valuable critical mineral concession. Now, for us, what we take note of is that all this is happening above the heads of the Congolese people. Congolese people didn't have a say in this deal, whether it's owned by a Chinese, whether it's owned by an American company. All they know is that they've been displaced, been promised schools, been promised hospital, been promised education, and virtually none of it has been delivered on. Whether it was when it was owned by Freeport-McMoRan, or now when it's owned by China Molybdenum, right? So the deals are happening, even as they're talking about critical minerals deals between the Congo and the U.S. government. We see that the area of one of the largest lithium deposits in the world that's just been discovered, Monono, right, is kind of up for grabs in a sense. So you have a company called Cobalt, that have investors like Jeff Bezos, Amazon billionaire, have Bill Gates, Microsoft billionaire, Michael Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg News, all of that. They're vying to get access to lithium mine in Monono, right? So there's so much that's already happening that, and even with the deal that President Tshisekedi is looking to offer to the U.S. Because much of the mines are captured by the Chinese. They're saying this one concession that was owned by a company called Chemath. Chemath was I don't know if it's still an Indian company. At one point, it was an Indian company, right? That's probably the best option, or maybe even one of the few options in terms of what the President Tshisekedi may have to offer to the Americans. Of course, there's you can almost predict, right, that those concessions that are owned by Dan Gertler, where he's making $200,000 a day, and the Biden administration, according to the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg News and all that, were saying that they're trying to enter into a deal with Dan Gertler, right, to give up those mines. I think they're offering them like $300 million or so, which would clear the path for American investors to come and acquire those mines. Who are, that he's in deals with Glencore, right? So that's a possibility. I wouldn't be surprised to see the sanctions lifted on Dan Gertler under the Trump administration. When Trump came in, or when he was leaving in 2020, he lifted the sanctions. Gertler had folks like Alan Dershowitz lobbying for him to get those sanctions lifted. So the point is, there's just so much intrigue. So the thing about the Congo is, like, you have all the Indians and the Chinese and the Americans and the Kazakhs, and just it's so wealthy. There's so much at stake, and that's all the more reason why you need an organized mass of people, and to be complemented by folks around the world who are in solidarity with them, because as our brother Dedi says in the film Crisis in Congo, everybody wants a piece of Congo.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And for those who are joining us, thank you again for joining us. I'm Gaetan with Friends of the Congo, and I'm with Maurice Carney, Executive Director of Friends of the Congo. We are talking today about the justice, and right now you were tackling about the economic aspects before we dive really into the justice part, justice component. And one burning question that I have for today's space, the live and food for thoughts for folks who are watching. The question is international justice possible for the atrocity committed in the Congo? And more specifically, can Rwanda be taken to an international court? Can Paul Kagame, as the head of state or the president of Rwanda, be held personally accountable? And what mechanism exists today? And you touched on some of them when talking about the economy, and also, most importantly, what are the obstacles, right, to those mechanisms? And one thing that I feel like sometimes gets overlooked, and you and I, we had a conversation about that, was right after the publication of the 2010 UN mapping reports, which really mapped out the atrocities, and we're talking about 617 incidents of war crimes against humanity, and genocide. But that doesn't really get much or enough attention, at least at the time when it was released, right? And because at the same time, we saw the rollout of industry initiatives, which, by the way, I thought that was beneficial for the Congo until I joined Friends of the Congo, until I had that conversation with you. So I think it's very, very important to kind of lay out that conversation, the framework of that institution, of these initiatives. And I'm talking about the ITSCI and the ITA.
International Tin Association.
Yeah, International Tin Association. Which had put in place like a sort of like a traceability programs, and these programs really claimed or were put together to promote a conflict-free minerals, but really many people argue that really shifted the conversation away from the justice and accountability toward multinationals and corporate compliance. So can you speak to how these so-called conflict mineral schemes have impacted the broader fight for justice? So what do you think, in your own person view and in the view also of the organization, that they serve to distract or even direct the momentum of the mapping report?
Yeah, man, how much time do we have?
We can speak as long as you want. I think it's very important to understand. Yes, for the folks to understand. Yeah,
you have to go back to 2010. You know, really, it's kind of interesting, the mapping report, right? The 2010 mapping report, in a lot of respects, has its roots in the Garreton report, Roberto Garreton, right, who worked for the United Nations and documented the atrocities that were being committed in the Congo between 1996 and 1998, right? That's when Rwanda and Uganda invaded the first time, and just a lot of killings has taken place, a lot of atrocities. It's also covered pretty good in Howard French's book, A Continent for the Taking, right? Where because he was a reporter on the ground dealing with the issue at the time. So the UN mapping exercise report, and I asked the head of the person who led the report, a gentleman by the name of Luc Cote, right, out of Canada. He led the UN mapping exercise report. And you have to understand, Gaetan, what happened at the time in 2010, because the mapping report was published on October 1st, 2010. But in August, right, it was leaked, right? And it may have been published because it was leaked, right? It was leaked before it was published, right? And it was leaked, and news agencies started reporting on it. The head of the UN at that time was Ban Ki-moon, right? And without any action, right, Paul Kagame summoned Ban Ki-moon to Kigali. It's like, what's going on here? In this report, you were saying that there's a double genocide, that's unfolding, that we're committing genocide. I mean, if you do a quick search and just pull it up for the people, you'll just type in Ban Ki-moon mapping report 2010, right? And Kagame, and they can see some of the headlines. So the Kagame was concerned because his soldiers were, unequivocally being accused of genocide in the Congo, and the report is really the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. It was headed up by Navi Pillay at the time, and maybe we'll even play her video if we can pull it up. I'll put it in the chat or something for people to see. But the main point is that there was a lot of controversy, consternation around the leaking of this report, right? And then subsequent publishing of this report. And in fact, the French ambassador to the United Nations was basically saying that, well, this report is, the United States is attempting to bury the report, right? And at the time, the ambassador to the United Nations, right, was Susan Rice, right? Now, if you know Susan Rice's history, and Howard French covers it too, he both in Continent for Taking, and he wrote a extensive article for the New York Review of Books entitled Kagame's Hidden War in the Congo, right? So Susan Rice is key, right, when we talk about Central Africa, because she, along with Madeleine Albright and Bill Clinton, they're the ones who, put this imprimatur on the Kagames and the Musevenis of the new breed of African leaders, the Renaissance leaders, right? The new Pan-African leaders. This is what's coming out, of the Clinton administration. That's why I share with young West Africans, you're all talking about Kagame as a Pan-Africanist. That came out of Washington, right? This is what you're saying, what Susan Rice said 20 years ago. You're saying what Madeleine Albright said 20 years ago. you're aping what Bill Clinton said 20 years ago. You may think like, okay, you're the one who was saying that this guy's the model for Africa, the model leader, but Susan Rice said that before you did. Madeleine Albright said that before you did. You know what I'm saying? So, in any case, the French were saying that the U.S. was blocking. So what we did at the time, we had like I think you call it a phone storm, where we mobilized to have people call Susan Rice's office, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. This is like in 2010, to pressure her to publish the report, and to not only publish it, to act on the report, right? And in addition to that, in terms of mobilizing folks to pressure the U.S. ambassador, then we also connected with some progressive members of Congress. There's a congresswoman, and got to give her a shout out, former congresswoman Donna Edwards out of Maryland, right? We collaborated with her, and she provided us with a space to have a briefing in Congress on the UN mapping exercise report, right? Briefing to educate members of Congress and to make a policy demand on members of Congress. We're saying, hey, the ambassador is not acting on this report, and the French are saying that she's, Ambassador Rice is blocking the report. So as members of Congress, what kind of pressure can you put on the Obama administration to deal with this issue? On our YouTube channel at Congo Friends, you can see the recordings of the briefings from 2010, right? In the U.S. Congress. The fascinating thing about that briefing, though, it was all Africans, right? Nothing but Africans. Africans from Ghana, Africans from Uganda, Africans from Rwanda, Africans from Liberia, Africans from Congo. It was like an all African panel. Whenever they have hearings in the U.S. Congress, they usually, inevitably bring in, an expert from the U.S. to talk about African issues. We are all Africans talking about what is unfolding, and with some of them in their own countries, right? And then Africa overall. So the point is that there was pressure we're trying to apply on the source of the conflict, right? And that is this at that point in 2010, it was a 14-year war of aggression and plunder against the Congolese people. And we're very clear about the source of it, right? Not only were we clear about it, the U.S. Congress was clear about it as well, and the President of the United States, then Barack Obama, because as one of his signature legislation as a senator when he was in the U.S. Senate was Public Law 109456, the Democratic Republic of Congo Relief, Security, and Democracy Promotion Act, right? That was sponsored by President Obama, who was now president at the time, his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton co-sponsored it, right? She was Secretary of State. So here it is, Gaetan. You have the Congolese people being killed by their neighbors, and as they're being killed by their neighbors with the backing of the U.S., when President Obama first was inaugurated, like the day or so after he was inaugurated, he made a shipment of weapons on the AFRICOM to Rwanda, right? When AFRICOM was launched, the Africa Command, in 2008, it was the head of it was a gentleman by the name of Kip Ward, a black, general from Morgan State. He was cheesing it up in Rwanda with James Kabarebe, right? So we were incensed, right? Like, because we know the role that James Kabarebe played, like he's a war criminal, and then here it is that you have, the Africa Command is cheesing it up. They're training Rwandan soldiers. Obama sending military equipment, to Rwanda, and so with this law that this bill that President Obama initiated got passed into law, there's a section in it, Section 105 of Public Law 109456, that says that the United States is authorized to withhold aid from countries that are destabilizing the Congo. So, we let some, we were sharing with students at this time, like, hey, this is what's happening. So students were fired up, right? Students were fired up, and the students launched, at the time, it was Hillary Clinton who was Secretary of State. So they launched a Dear Hillary campaign, right? Where we worked with them to develop this campaign, and they sent like thousands and thousands of postcards to the State Department, calling on the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to abide by U.S. law. Basically, that's all they're saying. They're saying Public Law 109456, Section 105, right? This, as you have it up there, the Secretary of State is authorized, right, to withhold assistance made available under Foreign Assistance Act, and then gets into the detail, right? For those who are destabilizing the Congo. So the students were on it, right? They're like the Dear Hillary campaign. They're sending in the postcards to the point, Gaitan, to the point. And we're talking about high school students and university students, right? The State Department got so many postcards from these students, right, that they invited them in to have a discussion about U.S. foreign policy in the Congo, right? Into the State Department.
Oh.
So there's pressure being applied. So we were clear.
Kambali was one of them?
No, Kambali was our spokesperson at the time still, because he joined us like in 2008 or something like that. So he was of course, rallying the students, because he was going and speaking on campuses throughout the country, traveling and educating and mobilizing students. So he was definitely, on the forefront, without doubt, of mobilizing these students to put pressure on the administration. And so the point is, we were clear, the United States government was clear, everybody was clear, right? That especially in the wake of the mapping exercise report, that pressure needed to be put on U.S. allies, Rwanda in particular, and to some extent Uganda. So, but no one wanted to act. There was a lack of political will to act. Sanctions from the UN, for example. When the mapping report came out, Navi Pillay said we have a database, right? Here in Geneva, right, of the perpetrators. Right? They knew who the perpetrators are, right? Within the Rwandan, top level officials within the Rwandan government. But because Rwanda was so useful to the West in terms of doing things in Africa that the U.S. probably didn't want to do or needed cover to do, they were reluctant to act, withhold any kind of aid. And even within this period, we were talking about international law, the Spanish courts, right, under the principle of universal jurisdiction. There's an international jurisprudence called universal jurisdiction, which is where a nation, can issue arrest warrants against top level officials in another nation. They committed war crimes against humanity, against their citizens, right? So the Spanish courts issued an international arrest warrants for 40 of Rwanda's top officials for crimes that they committed in Rwanda and in the Congo. They couldn't issue arrest warrant for the head of state, Paul Kagame, right? Because he's immune. He has immunity under that international law. So, and incidentally, one of the Rwandan generals, General Karenzi, right, was arrested in England under that principle of universal jurisdiction and the international arrest warrant that the Spanish courts, put out against the Rwandan top officials. And to show the extent to which now General Karenzi, right, he committed crimes in Rwanda, but he also led part of the forces that were involved in the 6-day war in Kisangani in the Congo, right, where Rwandan military fought against Ugandan military in Kisangani over minerals, right? So But talking about the protection around these folks, none other than Cherie Blair, Tony Blair's wife, who's advisor to Paul Kagame, came to the rescue of General Karenzi. She was a part of the legal team that got him off in the UK. So again, all of these pressure, the attempts to hold Paul Kagame in particular, and to some extent Museveni accountable, was either being blocked or protected. So when we come to the UN Mapping Exercise Report, and being officially published on October 1st, 2010, there wasn't anything behind it. It called for an international tribunal. It called for reparations for the Congolese people, because of the war crimes, the plunder, right? All of that. But as long as the powerful countries in the world, those who have influence at the strongest influence at the United Nations, don't act on it, nothing was going to be done. Now, at the same time, right, even here in Washington, there are organizations that are mobilizing around the Congo, and they wouldn't touch it. If you were to do a Google search on UN Mapping Exercise Report, you probably just see two organizations outside of the United Nations, Human Rights Watch and Friends of the Congo, that was pushing this, right? So even among the civil society in Washington, they were reticent, to pressure Kagame in any way. So in the wake of this now, and I'm not saying that, it was intentional, we see a campaign that was being launched, a conflict mineral campaign, under which the premise was that there are these minerals that are causing conflict. They call them the 3 T's and gold, tin, tungsten, tantalum, right? And the rationale is, well, these things are fueling the conflict in the Congo. So if you cut off, the source of the funding, that will end the conflict. And we were saying, well, no, not necessarily. Conflict minerals, putting the conflict on minerals is not the answer. They're actual human beings that are perpetrating this conflict, this war of aggression. And we know who they are, right? The United Nations has a database with their names, right? So for you to come up with a strategy that's saying it's the minerals and it's conflict minerals that's causing it. Now, the thing about it is with this conflict minerals, and this will kind of take you to ITSE, is the idea is that it was enshrined in law, right? The Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, which is a product of the financial crisis in 2008 in the United States. There's Section 102, I believe, the conflict minerals, Section 102 of the Dodd-Frank Act calls on publicly traded companies to trace their supply chain, to assure or to report to the Securities and Exchange Commission that there's no conflict that's a part of the minerals that they're sourcing from the Congo, right? So publicly traded companies. So you have Apple and Intel, and what the fascinating thing is, Gaitan, that really probably got a lot of, will send people for a loop. This law and the adherence to the law. Do you know which of the tech companies has scored the highest and done the most to adhere to this law? I'll give you one guess.
Which one? Apple?
Apple.
Glencore? Apple? There you go.
Apple, right? So even for people talking about conflict minerals, they're like, we're going to boycott Apple. Well, you're going to boycott the company that's doing the most to adhere to conflict minerals. Right? But that's another story. I'm just saying, that's another story. So it just shows you how crazy this is. But in any case, right? So the essence of the law is that these publicly traded companies report to the Securities and Exchange Commission that, there's no conflict, in their supply chain, so to speak. Now, what this does is it sets up Rwanda, who is efficiently run right next door to the Congo, right? As saying, well, okay, you can come get minerals from us because there's no conflict happening in Rwanda. So if you source minerals from Rwanda, then you're sourcing clean minerals, basically, right? So now here it is that we've been pushing years of pressure to saying, like, sanction Kagame, withhold aid, right? And now you have this campaign that comes that's enshrined in the law that says that the minerals are the problem, and you need a clean supply chain. And if you have a clean supply chain, right, that's got no conflict in it, then you're going to end the conflict in the Congo, right? And by the way, Rwanda is standing there ready to say, hey, Apple and all of them, come and get the minerals from me, from us, basically, right? And as we saw, they have what they call the bag and tag. So the International Tin Association, ITSI, was bagging and tagging minerals in the Congo, transporting across the border and out, through Rwanda as clean minerals, right? So Congo's minerals, for all intents and purposes, were being cleansed as they crossed the border into Rwanda. So instead of Rwanda now feeling the pressure, they're now set up as the good guys to benefit from supplying the world with clean minerals that's been cleansed, right, coming out of the Congo. And the Congolese president, Joseph Kabila, responded to this law in a very interesting way. What he did, Gaetan, was he shut down the artisanal mining sector. He said, like, nothing coming out of Congo, right? So remember, you see, when the Congo has, the World Bank says up to about 2 million artisanal miners, right? Up to about 2 million artisanal miners. And they provide support for about 10 times their population, right? In terms of socioeconomic support. So this is a reality that we have to take into
the economy.
consideration.
They need that. The people need that.
The people need that, right? It may be horrible and all of that, but this is like desperation. So when they shut it down, what you saw was that people didn't no longer had a source, income in terms of the mining. So they would go into illicit affairs. So it could actually, that's why we say that enforcing that could actually increase the conflict, because you'd be shutting off, the source of income for artisanal miners, and they may go into other activities that can actually increase the conflict. So there are a number of studies that were done at the time that demonstrate the devastating impact that this law would have on local population, particularly the artisanal miners, right? So when we come to today and we see like young activists saying conflict minerals and we had to like go after Apple, go after this, I'm like, this is like this it's been demonstrated, it's been studies that this is not what's going to end the conflict in the Congo, right? We know that when the U.S. and the European Union, all of them withheld military aid from Rwanda in 2012, ultimately, along with a number of other factors, we saw that M23 was dismantled. It's just that they retreated back, into Rwanda and Uganda to be incubated, which really says to us, the source of the problem is not the M23. The juice are those states that are backing them, that are commanding them, that are controlling them, that are sending their soldiers to be in there with them. Because it could be M23, as you said, it could be CNDP, it could be AFDL, it could be Laurent Nkunda, it could be Jules Mutubusi, right? All of these folks that have come along the years, some of them have gone, but two have remained constant. 30 years, Paul Kagame in Rwanda, 40 years, Yoweri Museveni in Uganda. They've got the region in a death trap, particularly the Congolese people, right? And conflict mineral campaign is not going to solve that problem. A conflict mineral campaign distracts us from those agents of neocolonialism that has the military, the intelligence, the equipment, the financial backing of the West, and then get diplomatic and political cover when a UN mapping report comes out that calls for accountability, that calls for justice, that calls for an end to the impunity, right? So I think for young activists today, it would really behoove them to look at the history of this and what happened, so that now that we have the world's attention, we don't send people down a path that it's not going to produce any kind of solution anytime soon, and make people despondent because they're seeing like, okay, I boycott Apple and the violence is increasing. Then what am I doing? Why am I on a campaign I'm not saying you don't shame them. I'm not saying you don't apply pressure to them, right? But, run it down the line. Is that gonna produce the result that you're looking for? So in any case, that's the sort of policy history of how things have unfolded with a mapping report, at least from our view anyways, our telling of it from Friends of the Congo, because we're there in all of the meetings, before 2010. And we're engaged in trying to present a different narrative and mobilizing young people, mobilizing students to go to the heart of the matter, which is to cut that umbilical cord between the US, the UK, Europe, and its agents who are killing Africans. That's what they're doing, right? They're killing Africans. We saw there was a hearing here in Congress where dealing with access to critical minerals in Africa. And one of the Congressman, Ronnie Jackson, I think it was, he was said to be a special envoy. I don't know if that's the case. But he was making the argument.
He was not.
Yeah, he was making the argument about, basically Kagame's talking points, right? Saying that, we got to go after the FDLR, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, protect ethnic minorities in the Congo, Tutsi minorities, right? And we're saying, Gaitan, say, even before arguing his points, right? Even before arguing his points, say there was an issue that minorities are being persecuted, right? FDLR wreaking havoc, right? Threatening the security of Rwanda. You have to ask yourself, as a congressman, as a human being, right? In order to protect Rwanda's security interests, what has been done in the past 30 years in the Congo, is that worth it? And what has been done in the past 30 years in the Congo, Gaitan, is estimated 6 million Congolese killed, perished. Right now, 7 million Congolese internally displaced. So you have the equivalent, Gaitan, of the current population of Rwanda that's been displaced or killed in the Congo, all in the name of protecting minorities and the security interests of Rwanda. Is that the price that the world is asking Congolese people to pay? The population of Rwanda, to protect Rwanda's security interests and the minority interests in the Congo? Almost the entire population. Now, I know some people are saying, well, it's actually 10 million Congolese who have perished. I don't know where they got that number from. I'm not going to dispute the number, but for us, once you get into the millions, it doesn't matter if it's 6 million or 10 million. We know there are two mortality studies that's been done on the Congo. One that says International Rescue Committee says 6 million people from 1997 to 2007. Another is done by a group of scholars that said there are actually 3 million. But I don't know where the 10 million came from. I heard the president of the Congo say 10 million, and more people saying, well, there's got to be 10 million Congolese. The point is, you can say 20 million. That's not going to make people care more. Once you start getting into the millions and the world is not in an uproar, whether you say 5 million, 6 million, 20 million, 10 million, is that going to make people act more? Right? The fact of the matter is, like, millions of Congolese have perished. And there's just on that alone, the world ought to be in an uproar, right? To see how the carnage can be brought to end. We don't have to make up numbers, right? We don't have to create them out of thin air, right? We have data, and what's been studied in the data in terms of excess death is enough of a scar in the conscience of humanity at the dawn of the 21st century to see that this level of carnage is taking place in the Congo. Half of them are children under the age of 5, right? So that this question of how we really deal with it. That's why I said I really appreciated what the pastors were saying, that the Congolese people, the forefront of it, popular education, ultimately, because it's not just a question of bringing an end to a conflict. It's a question of why was Lumumba assassinated? That's the central question. He was assassinated because Congolese people, led by Lumumba, wanted that spectacular wealth. What European powers said, is European geographers and geologists, the dawn of the 20th century said, is a geological scandal. And for Congolese and Africans to have that, they're willing to see millions of Congolese perish, so that Congolese don't control that. And I tell you what, boycotting Apple is not going to enable Congo to control that wealth, and that's what's at stake. Resource sovereignty, and that's for the benefit of Congo, but for the benefit of Africa overall. All right. So I may have gone too much into it, but that's just like a brief.
You have been. And listen, you and I, we always discuss and we always have these internal debates and conversations, exchange of knowledge. That's how I call it. But I think this was the first time for you to really go in depth and hear about how the Dodd-Frank Act was never really created to help the Congolese people. It was actually created to cover it, or to shift the conversation, or to remove the burden on Rwanda and focus our attention on something completely different. Like, it's okay to plunder the Congo as long as there's a tag that says a conflict mineral free, right? And
it's conflict free.
And it's very important for people, conflict free, yes, conflict free minerals, right? And it's important for people to understand that, because some of these things came from like years ago. Sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, you just triggered a thought for me, though. Really, let's just say conflict free works wonderfully. It's wildly successful, right? Conflict free minerals coming out of the Congo. Now, we believe that what that does is that it puts a stamp, so to speak, right, on impoverishment and dependency, right? Because it now means that you can extract minerals from the Congo, right, conflict free, and the people can still remain in abject poverty. The country can still be deep, right? Conflict free doesn't address that. You know what I'm saying? And there's no path to it, right? So it's really it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, because we're talking about a country with a colonial legacy, and that colonial legacy is still very much in place. That's been hyper plundered, right? And now you're saying is, let's certify the hyper plundering of the Congo, right? That's what you're saying. Let's certify the hyper plundering of the Congo, because in conflict free, it doesn't say anything about dealing with the abject poverty, where 70 million Congolese are living on less than $2.15 a day, right? It doesn't say anything about a government that its gross domestic product is just a little bit more than the cash that Apple has on hand, right? Right? It doesn't deal with that.
It's a very important conversation to have.
$55 billion in cash, and Congo could be conflict free, and they're operating off of a budget that's equivalent to the budget of the NYPD, the New York Police Department, right? So
yeah,
we have to really engage in terms of political education around what's really at stake, especially when we start advocating and educating people about what we on the outside can do, right? Those who are in solidarity with the Congolese people, right? And so that's you just triggered that thought for me. Like, conflict free doesn't mean poverty free.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're now independent and free and liberated. It means like the plunder and the extraction is now certified, right? The companies,
and I think it's important to remind folks that the colonial legacy that you're talking about, that is today's Congo, really the foundation of it is Black people in Africa, there was no justice for them because they were not even considered human in the first place, right? But today we're trying to have this conversation now. We're talking about a free Africa, a free Congo, free Sudan, and we're trying to frame the entire conversation around justice, which also means that the lives of Black people in Africa, right, matter that we need to organize, we need to mobilize so that we find justice for those who are being displaced. 7 million people displaced, as you mentioned, as per the International Organization for Migration, and 5.4, about 6 million people killed as per International Rescue Committee, and a lot of, like over a million women have been raped ever since the beginning of the conflict. So when we now talking about a legal pathway, like the International Court of Justice, and then
There's
the
the
International
International Criminal Court. There's the International Court of
yeah,
Justice. You know,
International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and even the universal jurisdiction that you mentioned, about the Spanish legal system,
Spanish courts. Yeah.
and yes, about the Spanish one. And you have followed these international processes closely for decades with Friends of the Congo. I'm not sure how much of your time we have, but what do you think are the most realistic legal avenues today for holding Rwanda or Kagame specifically, or Museveni, accountable? What role can the African led mechanism or regional bodies like the African Union
Mm.
play if that international court remain politically blocked? I think these are really important questions to ask. And then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're important questions to ask, and then we also have to look at the history, right? You know, the first 4 individuals that were brought in front of the International Criminal Court, right? The ICC, were Congolese,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think therein lies the, I guess, the kernel of the problem. In that, I don't know if this is the best analogy. It's almost like you have a gangster outfit, right? And you have the head of the gangster outfit, and then like a drug cartel, and then you have the runners, those who are on the streets, and you have a justice system that goes and captures the runners and bring them to justice, right? Those 4 Congolese, but the kingpins are left untouched, right? For whatever reason, for geostrategic reasons, geostrategic interests, right? We see that even at the ICC that has addressed the question of the Congo, the first 4 cases at the ICC are Congolese, but they didn't get the kingpins. You know what I'm saying? The head of the CNDP, the former head of the CNDP, Bosco Ntaganda, he's in the ICC right now, right? The M23 is a product of the CNDP, right? Makenga and Ntaganda were together. Even if you go back to the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda, when there was some accountability trying to be instituted, you go way back there, I think Carlo Del Ponte, who was heading it up at the time, was trying to hold Paul Kagame and the Rwandan Patriotic Front for the crimes that they committed in Rwanda, and she was removed by higher powers. Right? If you read Judy Rever's book in Praise of Blood, she gets into it in detail, right? So what that does, for me is to question the viability or the veracity of these international entities, right? That are supposed to deliver justice. When we know that those who are the architects can be protected. We've seen the International Court of Justice in 2005. The Congo won the case against Uganda, right? For Uganda, for plundering Congo's resources, committing war crimes, crimes against humanity in the Congo. At the time, they said Uganda owed Congo billions of dollars in reparations. At the same time, the Congolese tried to bring the same charges against the Rwandan government, right? But Rwanda is not party to the International Court of Justice, so they could only carry on with Uganda. And I think over the years, from 2005, when the ruling came down, we saw that the dollar amount, instead of billions of dollars, it turned out to be hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't even know if it's that high, but it's no longer billions. And I think Uganda started paying reparations, right, to the Congolese government. Now, Gaetan, even as Uganda started paying,
$360 million.
how much is it? 360? Even if Uganda started paying reparations,
360 million. Yeah.
paying reparations to the Congolese government, right? You have a group in Kisangani who are the victims of the 6-Day War. They're not seeing any of that. At least that's what they're saying, right? There's a film by our brother Diodore Hamdi called Downstream to Kinshasa, where he does a remarkable job of documenting the victims of Kisangani and their pursuit of justice, right? So here it is that you have an international body. The Congolese government brought suit against it. They won, but the people still haven't been repaired, right? The victims of the 6-Day War, which Diodore Hamdi captures, remarkably well in his film Downstream Kinshasa. I believe that's the title of his film. They're still in pursuit. So it just makes me question to what extent the Congolese people can get justice and accountability through these international bodies, right? I was talking to Sister Camille today, earlier, and we were talking about the U.S. and the progress that has been made in the U.S. over the years. People say, you'll hear some U.S. politicians say like how advanced the U.S. is and democracy and all that. Africans in America had to their blood had to be shed for them to get the right to vote. They had the people, whatever you see in terms of, to the extent that you see that there's democracy in the United States, it's a product of the people's movements, people's blood being shed and organizing and transforming the country. So just using the U.S. as a model, there's no substitute, for popular education, mass movements, in order to bring about whatever it is that you want to bring about. If you want to bring about accountability, you want to bring about justice. It's just very dubious, to think that it's going to be delivered by either a continental body, right, or international body. We look at Hussein Abre from Saint Debbie, I think, from Chad, and it looks like we lost you again there for a second, Gaetan. We see that the African courts had brought him to book after years of court battles, and I suspect that's what we may see with Kagame. I don't know. That's that he'll be going down that Debbie path, but
one thing sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Go ahead.
But one thing he told me once is that when there was this arrest warrant against Paul Kagame, you said that he was essentially bailed out by Tony Blair. Is that correct?
No.
Or
There was never an
20's
arrest
arrest
warrant
warrant?
against Paul Kagame. It was one of the Spanish courts had an international arrest warrant
Okay.
out on 40 top officials in the Rwandan government as a part of
Mhm.
the international jurisprudence of universal jurisdiction. And General Karenzi was arrested under that warrant in the UK, and the wife of Tony Blair represented him, was part of his defense in the courts, where he is ultimately left off, or he was ultimately let go. But Kagame was immune. He was not. He was not part of it, of the arrest warrant, right? So what I was saying is that Kagame may. There's a possibility that the Hussein Habre path may be the path where some kind of justice could be delivered around Kagame for the crimes that he's committed in the Congo. We'll see. But my battery's running low, so we may have to, do like it to be
Wow.
continued on this one.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, that's we're gonna have a part two. We're gonna have a part two. Yeah, we're gonna have a part two. And thank you so much for that conversation. We tried to address right the issue of justice, and starting with first the framework of the economic framework, and how what the DRC has been the main the attraction, right? Like the reason why one, Congolese are being killed, are being displaced, and then two, the involvement of other regional actors like the United States. We talked about the visit of a special envoy presenting Donald Trump in the Congo. He met with Tshisekedi yesterday, and I think the bulk of the conversation really was about International Internet Association and the Dodd-Frank Act, and how these initiatives came in lies to essentially shadow or shift the conversation away from accountability and justice that were mentioned in the mapping report published
Gaetan, let me say something just about how
Go ahead.
sensitive it was at the period.
Yes.
The mapping report
was
authored by or headed up by a gentleman by the name of Luc Cote, right? And we had a forum with him to talk about the mapping report, right? And he only agreed to do it if it was off the record, right? We have it recorded, but we don't have permission to share or publish it, right? So you think this blockbuster report, and we have the person who authored the report, who led the report. We had him on a panel having a discussion right there in Harlem, Congo in Harlem. The house was the Rwandan. I swear, the entire Rwandan mission at the UN was in the room, right? They even stayed for drinks afterwards.
Yeah.
So, but we had Luc Cote, and we're like, okay, now we got him. This is the author of the report. This is the guy who did the report. He's laying it out. And he's like, you cannot publish that. You cannot share that publicly. We have it, but we can't share it, right? So I just say that just to give you a sense of how sensitive it was at the time. That this was like a blockbuster report that that dropped. That really pinpoint, that says that the Rwandan soldiers basically, if brought in front of a competent court, can be tried for genocide in the Congo, right? And even though, and that statement was watered down. That's why Kagame summoned Ban Ki-moon to Kigali. Like, you can't have this in a UN report accusing my soldiers of genocide in the Congo. So in any case,
Paul Kagame summoned the Secretary General of the United Nations.
I may be exaggerating. Maybe he got on the plane and went to Kigali.
I mean,
I'm just using the term.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. Like the fact that, but here's the thing. And these are facts. What I'm about to say is a fact. The
Right.
report, and you said that yourself, the report was published in October, but it was leaked months before.
In August. In
Why
August
would
of
you want to leak something
because there
unless you think in August? It was leaked in August. Why would you want to? Why would you want to leak something unless you think that either they're not going to publish it or they're
exactly
going to uh, uh, edit it in a way that it's watered down, in a way that it's being censored, right? And that's
right.
the whole issue when it comes to the entirety of even Genocost campaign fighting for justice, right? Like,
Mhm.
if we can no longer name those who have committed crime, if we can no longer even say, because you're saying that was even an issue at the time, that if brought in front of a competent court, the Rwandan government, including Paul Kagame, James Kabarebe, sanctioned by the United States, will be found guilty or could be found guilty of crimes against humanity, crimes, war crimes, and crimes of genocide, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that really speaks volumes to what has been at place, right? What is being playing at play in the Congo when it comes to the war of aggression, when it comes to the plundering of the Congo, of the mineral resources. And I think the most important is making sure that the Congolese people are never, ever able to take control of their own affairs, because that's essentially the entire reason why Congo is being abjugated to atrocity. To, and you said that yourself, that the Congo is like trapped, right? It's worse
Mhm.
than death. Like, death is easy, you die, you dead, right? But
Yeah.
when there is a system in place that trapped you for not dying but suffering, just right in the middle, like, it's it's crazy. And that's why we need to continue to have the conversation
Oh, without
that
a
we
doubt.
have, and we need to continue to mobilize. We need to continue to talk to youth and Congo's youth and allies, right? Not
Mhm.
just in the Congo, not just in the US, but across the globe, about the
Absolutely.
importance to lobby, the importance to recognize that Congolese folks have agency, and Congolese folks also deserve justice, just as we've seen justice for crimes around the world, right? And
Mhm.
that's why I can really only thank you. I thank you for the work that you have been doing. Commend you for the courage, right? Like, it's crazy when I look back to the movie Congo Crisis Uncovering the Truth, and when you frame it the way you did, I'm like, this was a sensitive topic. So you guys still
Yeah.
decided to like go forward, push this, and call. So
Well, I
it
mean,
must have been really a scary moment for you
yeah,
and for
well,
friends of the Congo team at the time,
yeah.
particularly Kambali. Right? What do you think?
But right, yeah, I know, Kambali and the death threats. But yeah, actually, the folks who, well, anyways, I won't say that. But yeah, it was a sensitive period, without a doubt. But
I
something else,
mean, come
I
on,
know we
come
keep going
on.
back, we keep going back. Something
Yeah.
I want to share around that whole colonial legacy that that we've been talking about. And you're talking about the scope of activism over the years, 20, 25 years or so, right? You know, one of the biggest, and then we're talking about how the Congolese people are really the sacrificial, um, I don't want to say the sacrificial lamb of our time. I don't even know if that's the right term, but in essence, the Congolese people have been sacrificed, right, for a whole host of reasons.
Mm.
They've been sacrificed, the humanity has said that we're going to sacrifice these folks in the heart of the African continent, right? That's the end result of it, right? That we've said that, and part of the challenge in
Mhm.
organizing people, Gaitan, when we talk about colonial legacy, we're not just talking about the poverty, we're not just talking about the plunder, we're not just talking about, you know, the lack of infrastructure, right? Roads and communications and all. But there's this colonial prism that comes with it, right? And the colonial prism, which is a lens through which we see Africa as a dark continent, right? And then the Congo is the heart of darkness, right? A la Joseph Conrad, right? So when we look at when the world views Africa and Congo in that way, millions of human beings can perish and the world not pay attention, not see value because they say, well, those people are subhumans. They're imbued with certain atavistic qualities that condemn them to perpetual violence. Therefore, we don't have to inquire. We don't have to investigate. We don't have to come up with studies and researches to see why this is happening because we already have the answers based on our prejudices,
Yeah.
right? That these people are not fully human, right? And that's that colonial prism is a part of that colonial legacy. And that's something that we have to dismantle in order for the world, even Africans themselves, to see Congolese as fully human and worthy of peace and worthy of justice, right? So that colonial prism has been a challenge in dismantling it. You know, to have reporters really want to go in and write investigative reports like our sister Ann Garrison does, right? She was just on, right? That students want to take this up as a study, as their master's thesis, dissertations, and professors want to teach classes on it in a way that's going to bring light, right? That this is really not, we're not talking about the heart of darkness. We're talking about where a lot of light is coming out. That's why we talk about Basanja, the Basanja Coalition, those folks on the front lines who are organizing to say, hey, we have ideas, we have principles, we have philosophies, and we have solutions, and we're working them, and we're calling on you, you know, to join us to shred, you know, remove the scale of the colonial prism and engage us as fully humans with agency who are organizing to change this, and you can be a part of it, right? So the point is that colonial legacy also brings a part of it is that colonial prism, the lens through which, the prism through which we view Africa in general and Congo in particular. And part of the challenge is demystifying that, transforming that, you know, flipping it on its head, disrupting it so that we can view Congolese in particular and Africans as fully human. That's worthy of those, benefits that we talk about, those rights that we talk about, you know, the right to justice, the right to decent living, the right to own their own wealth and control their own affairs. They're like, you don't have the right to do that. We're going to kill as many of you all as we can if you try to control that all that wealth.
Yeah.
So I just got a low battery mark. So I have to be shut down.
Yes. Listen, we have been going for almost 2 hours. We can wrap it up right there.
That's ridiculous.
And pause and continue. This has been a really incredible conversation, and I'm sorry for folks online just continue having issues with connection. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe it's me trying to manage everything, but yeah, we've had a really, really, really great conversation. I think Maurice just dropped really great conversation regarding justice, right? The concept of justice, and we were joined. I was joined by Maurice Carney, the executive director of Friends of the Congo, discussing really this concept of justice, what it means for Congolese people, what it means for Black people, right? Because even for those who are in Europe right now or who are in the US, they need to understand that as long as Black people in Africa are oppressed, as long as there are millions of people being displaced in Africa somewhere, killed in Africa somewhere, raped in Africa somewhere, Black people in the US, Black people in Europe will also be seen as less than human. So it's very important, even on the Pan-African side, right? Pan-African perspective, human perspective, to organize and realize and being able to frame the conversation, saying that the Black people, no matter where they are around the world, they are also worthy of justice. They are worthy of life, and the system right now, the way it's set up, has trapped Black people in the heart of Africa to die out of poverty, to die out of hunger, for women to be raped, for children to be enslaved, right? So we did discuss about justice for the Congo, whether or not it was possible to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Can Rwanda or Paul Kagame be taken to international court? We discussed a few pertinent questions regarding this concept of justice. One is whether or not Rwanda, as the regime of Rwanda, the government, the Rwandan government, could be taken to an international court. We discussed that what has been done with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Can Paul Kagame, as the head of state, be held personally accountable? Moise Carney brought up the 2008 indictments by the Spanish courts and mentioning, I think 40 Rwanda officials were mentioned, including James Kabarebe, and then they say specifically in that document that they couldn't really do anything about Paul Kagame because he was the president. He is the president of Rwanda, but that doesn't mean that he cannot face justice. Don't get me wrong. There is again, there was a history, something that has been done when we saw the former president, I believe it is of Sudan, right? Yes, Paul Kagame or Rwanda is not a party, is not party to the Rome Statute and that treaty which established the ICC, the International Criminal Court. But that doesn't mean that he's above the law. That doesn't mean that he cannot face justice. And the UN Security Council, right, has that power to refer non-member states to the ICC. That's exactly what happened in 2005, like I was mentioning with President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan in 2005. And he was president at that time. But the UN Security Council decided that the guy had to be tried. So if crimes are committed on the territory of the member states, the ICC can 100% intervene. And that was the conversation. We're not done. We're going to continue, maybe dive into the elements that Maurice Carney, gave us with the mapping report, diving really into what has been said in that mapping report. And yeah, see, Ann Garrison is also following us, and she says, salute to you. And she said Steve Edge and that UN group of experts did great work. The report said that the M23 was directly commanded by James Kabarebe, who was then the Rwanda defense chief. She also said that Kagame and his buddy or Buffett attacked and harassed him, and even his family did the same. So a lot of things, and sometimes that's why I wanted really us to have this conversation, for us to talk regarding like whether or not it's even possible to see this guy being tried, to see justice, right, for Congolese people, for the children, for the women, for the million of people who has been, demanding for justice. The question. I'm not gonna say last question, but yeah, that was the conversation today. Please stay tuned for part 2. We're going to dissect, break down the conversation regarding justice, and trying to bring you one of the best guests to have this type of conversation. So hopefully stay tuned. Follow Friends of the Congo on X, Congo Friends. We also on Instagram, Congo Friends, at Congo Friends, and follow Genocast, right? At Genocast, Genocide for Economic Gain. Follow us. We are campaigning for justice, and follow us. Stay tuned, and we're gonna have a great conversation next Friday. Until then, hope you guys have a good weekend. Peace.